Charles II of Spain sits at a heavy wooden table, and the room goes quiet. A plate is placed in front of him. To anyone else, it looks like a normal meal, but for the most powerful man in Spain, it is a daily ordeal. He opens his mouth, and the problem becomes impossible to ignore. His lower jaw juts forward so far that his teeth do not meet. He cannot chew like other people. He drools because his mouth cannot close properly. The food on his plate has to be pre-mashed, processed into a paste, so the king of Spain can swallow it. He is the face of an empire that spans the globe, yet he is being fed like a young child because his own body cannot do the job. If you look at him in this moment, you might feel pity. You might think he is simply the victim of bad luck or a random illness, but Charles is not an accident. He is a result. The reward for staying with this story is simple but terrifying. You will see how one family chased purity so hard that they bred weakness into their own throne. You will see how a myth about royal blood turned into a physical trap you could see in every portrait. Charles II was born into a dynasty that treated marriage like a chess move. It was not about romance or choice. It was about strategy. The goal was to keep power, land, titles, and money inside the family. Over time, that goal became an addiction. By the time Charles became king, ruling from 1665 to 1700, he was the last stop on a timeline that had been running for centuries. People remember him for the Habsburg jaw, a condition called mandibular prognathism, where the lower jaw sticks out far past the upper one. It became a family trademark in portraits, a sign that you were looking at a Habsburg. But in Charles, it was not a quirky look. It was a disability. It shaped his speech, his eating, and his daily life. He did not choose the marriages that made him. He inherited his body like a curse wrapped in velvet. The struggle that shaped him was baked in from the start because his parents were uncle and niece. That is not a rumor. It is the core of the story. That one fact matters because it tells you how far the family had gone to keep the bloodline tight. A single number puts his life in context. Charles had an inbreeding coefficient of 0.254. That is a technical label, but it has a simple meaning. The chance of getting the same harmful gene from both sides of the family was extremely high. This value is higher than what you would expect in the offspring of two siblings. In plain terms, the family tree was folding in on itself so tightly that Charles was getting the same genetic cards dealt again and again until bad hands became normal. The family built him, decision by decision, marriage by marriage. The first drama starts with the Habsburg obsession. Keep power in the line. Their problem was fear. They feared losing land and feared outsiders claiming their throne. They worried that a marriage outside the circle would weaken the dynasty. They had a clear choice: marry outward and spread the risk, or marry inward and keep control. They chose inward. The consequence did not show up like a lightning bolt. It showed up slowly, like a crack spreading across glass. Uncle-niece marriages and cousin marriages happened again and again. Each time, they concentrated recessive genes, which are hidden genes that can cause problems when a person gets the same version from both parents. With enough inbreeding, the hidden becomes visible. Studies of portraits confirm a direct link between this inbreeding and the shape of the family face, with Charles II as the peak case. Surgeons analyzed 66 portraits of 15 Habsburg royals spanning from 1477 to 1700. These were doctors who work with jaws and faces, and they scored the portraits for specific medical features. They looked for the lower jaw sticking out and the upper jaw being underdeveloped. The results turned the art into evidence. The early Habsburg in the study, Mary of Burgundy, shows minimal deformity. She is the before picture. But as the portraits move forward in time, the surgeons see the pattern building. The lower jaw traits rise in a straight, steady way that matches the rising inbreeding levels. Maximilian the Y stands out for maxillary deficiency, meaning his upper jaw region shows strong issues. Margaret of Austria shows similar problems. Charles the Furfurish appears in the list of those hit hard by these traits. By the time you get to Philip IV, the features are extreme, matching his extreme level of relatedness to his spouse. And finally, the scores climb highest in Charles II. This means the Habsburg jaw was not just a style choice by painters. It was a physical burden that grew heavier as the family tree looped back on itself. Charles's problem was his mouth, where his lower jaw pushed so far forward that his teeth misaligned severely. When teeth do not meet, chewing becomes a battle. You can bite, but you cannot grind food down. Add an oversized tongue and weak muscles, and he struggled to speak or eat solid food independently. That is not a small inconvenience. That is daily humiliation hidden under royal clothing. It carries a cruel contrast because he is a king with servants and gold. Yet he cannot do what a poor farmer can do without thinking: chew, swallow, and speak clearly. Every meal becomes a reminder that the dynasty paid for its strategy with his body. But the genetic load did not stop at his jaw. The data lists infertility, epilepsy, and frailty. These are the kind of problems that can end a royal line. Charles's problem was not only that he looked unusual, it was that he was fragile, and he could not produce an heir. That mattered because the entire Habsburg plan was built on one goal: keep the line going. Here is the twist that makes the story sting. Their strategy to keep power in the family ended with no family left to hold it. The Habsburgs wanted control. Charles had almost none over his own body. Their ancestors held the future in their hands, but Charles could not even chew his food without help. Their elders planned for heirs, but Charles ended the line. This reality created a terrifying environment for a child to grow up in. Charles was born into a plan that treated his existence as a necessity. The Habsburgs had a slogan: Bella gerant ali, to Felix Austria nub. It means, let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry. They became masters at taking territory without conquest. A wedding could do what an army could not. That success became their temptation. After about 1550, the pool of outside alliances shrank, and the Habsburgs turned inward. Not because it was charming, but because it was strategic. They began using close-kin marriages as a political tool to keep lands from splitting to outsiders. Uncle-niece unions became part of the toolkit. The message was clear: keep the power inside the bloodline and the empire stays whole. That logic built the world Charles inherited, but it also planted the seed that would destroy his Spanish branch. He was born into it like a child born into a family business that quietly breaks people. The numbers surrounding his childhood are chilling. Across 71 Habsburg families, there were 502 pregnancies. That is a huge number, enough to track real patterns. When researchers tracked mortality from birth to age 10, total deaths hit 35.9%. Out of every 100 pregnancies that resulted in children, about 36 ended in death before age 10. The losses came early. Infant deaths were 20.9%. Then child deaths added another 18.8%. These numbers were far above the Spanish village norms, which were around 20% for infant survival loss. In the Spanish branch, where Charles stood, about half of the children died before age 1. Out of 2 babies, 1 didn't make it to their first birthday. A palace cannot make that normal no matter how thick the velvet curtains are. It turns every birth into a gamble with awful odds. This is what inbreeding depression looks like in story form. It is a quiet force that amplifies recessive defects. Close relatives are more likely to share those risky versions of genes because they share ancestors. Add weakened immunity to that mix, and you get children who can't fight off what other children survive. Charles II was raised in a court that could not ignore this forever. Too many small coffins and empty cradles filled the royal history. Yet the court's problem was always the same. The family needed heirs to hold the land. Each death turned up the pressure. And pressure makes people grab harder at the tools they already know. Their tool was close marriage. They faced a choice that looks impossible. If they married outside the tight circle, lands could drift to other houses. Influence could leak away. If they stayed inside the circle, children could be born weaker, sicker, and more likely to die. They chose land over biology again and again. The scale of the genetic collapse is hard to overstate. Charles II had an inbreeding coefficient of 0.254, but he wasn't even the highest in the family history. Maria Antonia reached an F of 0.3053. That number is far above the sibling baseline. You don't reach 0.3053 by accident. You get there by repeated looping, where the same ancestors appear on both sides of the family tree over and over, closing the circle tighter each time. Because the people of the 17th century did not have genetic tests, they had fear. When the heir to Spain's throne showed deformities, seizures, and infertility, they reached for the only explanation that felt big enough. They decided the devil had a hand on the crown. Someone murmured the name that would follow Charles like a shadow. El Hechizado, the bewitched. Not the sick, not the unlucky. Bewitched. As if a curse crawled into his cradle and never left. This nickname wasn't a joke. It was a diagnosis in the language of fear. The court turned to religion, not medicine. That choice led to exorcisms and accusations of demonic possession. People did not just pray for him, they treated him like a battleground between heaven and hell. Charles himself was active in this tragedy. He sought the aid of friars and was convinced his soul was tormented. He wore a mysterious amulet filled with hair and nails because friars deemed a hex was upon him. That detail is chilling because it shows how personal the fear became. The king wore an object on his body, made from human pieces, because he believed he was cursed. Nuns allegedly channeled demons who confirmed a royal curse was blocking heirs. In plain terms, the court wanted a reason he could not produce a child, and they found it in a story where a demon speaks. That is how desperate people get when the future of an empire hangs on one fragile person. The heir problem is the knife edge of this story. Charles was infertile. That meant the line might end with him. In royal politics, a child is not just a baby. A child is a plan. No child means chaos. No child means every powerful family starts circling, asking who will inherit and who will profit. The ancestors of Charles II treated marriage like a lock on a treasure chest. Keep the key inside the house. That lock worked for power in the short term, keeping titles close and outsiders away. But the lock did something else. It locked harmful genes in too. Charles's face mirrored the family plan. His jaw was the physical expression of their inward marriage system. His difficulty eating mirrored how the dynasty consumed itself. This is not a moral lesson. It is a straight line from choice to consequence. The Austrian branch of the family offers a sharp contrast. They fared better because they occasionally outbred. Outbreeding simply means marrying outside the close family circle. Not every time, but occasionally. That small difference mattered. It shows that politics could bend and the biological cost could we ease. The Spanish branch, however, kept pushing the close marriage strategy until it produced a ruler who could not continue it. The dynasty acted as a human laboratory because they left exhaustive genealogies of over 4,000 individuals. They left a paper trail so detailed that researchers can calculate how related two spouses were with math, not guesses. They also left portraits, which means we can see faces change across generations. Without trying, they built a data set that lets us measure what happens when close kin marriage continues long enough to stack risks, generation after generation. Charles II becomes the end point, where the face reflects the math of relatedness. As the inbreeding coefficient rose, the jaw scores rose too. They rose in a straight line across generations and peaked in Charles II. The family faces didn't just happen to look similar, the changes tracked the level of inbreeding. The story lands on Charles because he is the one who had to live it. He did not ask to be the peak case. He did not select the inbreeding coefficient of 0.254 like a number on a contract. He lived inside the outcome. When you look at him, you are seeing centuries of decisions made in private rooms, justified as politics and paid for by a child who would grow into a fragile man. You are seeing why his teeth did not line up, why chewing became impossible, why drooling became constant, and why food had to be pre-mashed. You are seeing why the Spanish Habsburg line ended with him. When Charles died in 1700 with no heir, his body did not just end one life. It ended a dynasty's plan. It sparked the War of the Spanish Succession. The throne became a prize because the family that tried hardest to keep it had no one left to claim it. The empire that had been stitched together by marriages now tore open because one marriage strategy had gone too far. The same family tool meant to prevent fragmentation caused it. They married inward to keep outsiders out. In the end, outsiders came anyway, through war and succession, because the Spanish branch ran out of heirs. Charles II of Spain didn't ride into battle to win his kingdom. He inherited it like a heavy coat he could not take off. Courtiers watched him like hawks. They watched his face, his body, and his marriage bed because the whole empire hung on one thing. Would the king produce an heir? Every day, that answer stayed, no. The room got tighter. The family strategy that built the Habsburg world was now eating it from the inside. Charles didn't need an enemy army to threaten him. The threat was already in the family tree. If you remember one image, make it this: a king surrounded by wealth, titles, and ceremony, yet trapped by a family tree that folds back on itself. Charles II didn't just inherit a kingdom, he inherited the consequences of generations of choices. The Habsburgs treated marriage like a sword. By the time Charles wore the crown, the blade had turned inward. Charles II sits for a portrait, and the painter cannot hide what everyone sees. His lower jaw pushes forward, his chin juts out, and his upper jaw looks pulled back. He is a king wrapped in power, yet his own bones tell a different story. Not about battles, not about crowns, but about ancestry tightening like a knot, generation after generation, until his face becomes the proof. He failed to leave a child behind, not because he did not try, not because Spain had no power. He failed because his family treated marriage like a weapon for so long that the weapon turned inward. No army could defeat recessive genes. No treaty could negotiate with sterility. Charles II of Spain did not lose an empire with a sword fight. He lost it with an empty cradle.